Selsey Pavilion, originally known as Selsey Hall, is an Art Deco building designed by Harold Arthur Woodington. The intention was to bring cinema to Selsey, and it was affectionately known by locals as the Cinema Hall.
Selsey had a reputation for entertainment.
Right from the early days, it had a cinema licence, and it also was a performance venue for theatre, concert parties and the like.
The venue celebrated a long and entertaining time before falling dormant.
The regeneration of the pavilion has always been a dream for the Selsey Pavilion Trust and the wider community, but it's not without its hurdles. And now, we've got the challenge of actually bringing a building like this that has been badly neglected for over 50 years back into community use.
So what happened at Selsey Pavilion?
Well, World War I came pretty quickly after the opening of the pavilion, because the pavilion opened in August 1913, and just over a year later we were at war. And it went from being a cinema to a multifunctional hall, including an enlistment centre, which was run by Sir Archibald Hamilton, who was the recruiting officer. And there were lots of fundraising concerts put on at the pavilion during the war. And then at the end of the concert, these unsuspecting people were plied with cigarettes and given a pen to sign on.
The Selsey Pavilion has had many identities over the years, bizarrely all within the first few years of the building. So it started off as the Selsey Hall, which is actually written at the top of the building.
It then became known as cinema, but spelt with a K. But of course, at the end of the First World War, anything that sounded too Germanic had to be changed. So they decided to go for something rather grandiose, which was the Selsey Hippodrome in 1919.
Sadly, it only lasted for a year, and by 1920 it was already converted to the Selsey Pavilion and refurbished.
And even though it's still known as the Selsey Pavilion today, Selsey Hall still on the top of the facade. Mostly in the early 1920s, it was a venue for touring concert parties. There was some, but not very much, cinema. Yes, there has been a whole lot of urban myths, I suppose the best way of calling it, about the fact that the Russian Ballet appeared in the Selsey Pavilion. It didn't. A Russian ballet dancer appeared in the Selsey Pavilion. She just happened to be the world-famous Nijinsky, the sister of Nijinsky.
Nijinsky was a very, very famous Russian ballerina. She actually choreographed over 70 ballets in her lifetime.
They started off a tour in the UK in the London Coliseum. There was only 6 people in the group, and they performed it without scenery. The pavilion had a vacant date, and so did the Theatre Chorégraphique, and so Nijinsky came to the pavilion.
Bexhill, Margate, Selsey, and then Paris. Keith managed to uncover this amazing piece where she was ranting about her agent for booking her in tin pot towns, which clearly was a reference to Selsey. 1926 fire in the pavilion was the biggest of probably 3 or 4 fires over the years, and actually happened right where we're sitting now on the balcony.
In the evening, there was a touring concert party called Delight. And once they'd finished their show, the Selsey Golf Club staged a dance. And these dances often went on into the early hours of the morning.
The problem is someone left a cigarette up on the balcony. It was a massive, massive fire. And actually we found lots of records of the owner of the building at the time. He got quite badly burnt because he came down in the middle of the night after being alerted to the fire, and bits of the roof was falling off and he got hit by a few things. But actually, bizarrely, within about 2 years, there was another fire in the projection room, because back then film was nitrate, which was highly, highly flammable, and it all went up, and the same guy got burnt in that fire as well. So it had a pretty sort of torrid time in the 20s and 30s in terms of fires.
Well, Dan Denton came from Holloway in North London, and he put together a touring concert party. For most summer seasons, they either went to Linton and Lynmouth Pavilion or the Selsey Pavilion, and the concert party became known as the Selsey Follies, and they were extremely popular. They used to do 3 different shows a week.
R.C. Sheriff was an English writer and playwright.
He and his mother had a holiday home in Selsey, and then eventually it became almost more of a second home than a holiday home.
When he came back from the war, he was not in a good state. He was what they used to call shell-shocked. His mother, who lived in Sleepy Hollow, suggested to him that he should try and write about his experiences in the war.
In 1927, whilst he was on holiday here, sitting on a beach, looking out at the sea, thinking about his life in the trenches, he started to write Journey's End.
And this play, it was crazy. It was so successful. I think there was a lot of soldiers returning from war, and it just absolutely struck a chord. Laurence Olivier starred in the original cast.
Several performances of Journey's End were put on at the Pavilion, and in 1934 there are 2 entries in his diary stating that he was going to attend a rehearsal and a performance.
And Sheriff then ended up actually going to Hollywood and becoming a screenwriter for films such as The Dam Busters and some massive films.
When he retired, he then retired in Selsey. Well, the political landscape in the 1930s was one of rapid change. Many countries were becoming deeply nationalist, even very extremely so. One movement was fascism. It was on the rise because we had had a tough time in the early 30s with the Great Depression. And there was record unemployment and people were desperate. And so they looked for a solution. And this is where the British Union of Fascists came in. The party began in 1932. And its leader was Oswald Mosley.
The county's close proximity to London and the fact that there were quite a lot of willing workers in the area meant that it was quite an attractive place for the BUF to establish a stronghold. One source indicates that Oswald Mosley had a holiday home in Pagham as well. They would often hold rallies in the area, so they would have a meeting and then these would often be followed by a march. The black shirts, they would wear their black shirts to these meetings and they would come out in a big group and march through the towns. They were designed to be seen, they wanted to be noticed.
We know that there was a British Union of Fascists summer camp held near Medbury Mill, in a field near Medbury Mill, in July into August 1937. And at its height, about 14,000 attendees went to this camp. We can see people were wearing black shirts and also grey shirts, and they were the youth wing of the BUF. Oswald Mosley himself visited the Selsey summer camp.
And then he drove in his black car to the Selsey Pavilion, accompanied by Sir Archibald Hamilton and his Rob Roy Pipers. And then they went in to see a performance of the Selsey Follies.
Archibald Hamilton had been quite politically active in Selsey. He was later a member of the British Union of Fascists.
Although the party did have supporters, quite a lot of supporters, very vocal supporters in the area, there was also a lot of opposition to what they were trying to achieve as well.
Mosley was eventually arrested in 1940 and the Union of Fascists were made illegal in 1940 at the same time. Well, the outbreak of World War II affected the pavilion in that it never closed.
Its role became something more of a tool, if you like, for communicating what was going on in the war.
It was thought that getting people in and watching a film was going to be a nice diversion for them. Sally the chicken was a Rhode Island red hen who lived in the stables behind the Crown Public House, which is located next to the pavilion. And in 1942, it was noticed that she would come up the stairs and plant herself down in the projection box. And she would stay there for the whole of the first set of films. Rumour has it that she was infatuated by the Disney rooster waiting for him to appear in a film. I think it was a case of unrequited love.
After the war, the role of the pavilion did change quite dramatically, and instead of being somewhere that was very multi-purpose, used for concert parties and all sorts of other things, it sort of transitioned into a full-time cinema from 1942 onwards. It was showing 3 programmes of films a week. It was showing Saturday matinees. That really was the heyday. You know, people still didn't really have TVs at home. It really was thriving at that time.
The Saturday matinee was a new incentive to encourage children to go to the cinema. It was in the guise of something called the Roy Rogers Riders Club.
Well, we used to get up early and come down here, try and be first in the queue. It was quite a long queue, and it used to go right down the road.
We all had badges. Some people dressed up.
Well, Roy Rogers was an American cowboy and very, very popular. And the horse was a palomino called Trigger.
He'd sing a nice song called My Four-Legged Friend, which we all loved.
It was usually a serial where the hero or heroine was always in peril at the end of the episode, and you had to come back next week to find out whether they survived or not. Funnily enough, they always did. And usually some sort of cowboy film, or something else like Flash Gordon. That was very popular.
We had watched the film of Roy Rogers, and then we all went outside, and for a surprise, this palomino and this Roy Rogers came down the road here, just outside the door, and he did a big rearing up the horse, because that's what they did in those days. It must be me, just didn't realise until I was about 20 when my mum told me, you realise it wasn't Roy Rogers, and I realised he didn't ever come in this country, so that's true. The kiosk area was very small, and if we got inside out the rain we were pleased, and there was a little tiny window with a lady we knew used to give us a ticket when we paid our money.
Once you got your ticket, there was a gentleman, and we always call him Charlie, and he'd have a torch and take us through and take us to the seat with the torch.
And the seats were, like most theatre seats, dark red. They go black very easily and quickly, with very little light in there.
And they may have even had, the little brass buttons around the top and sides.
And if you're going up into the balcony, you'd turn right and go up a set of stairs, and then you'd get to the top, and then you'd have to fight for a seat, of course. You'd have to make sure that you'd been to the loo first, because it was practically impossible to get out.
Some people liked to go into the balconies, and they used to sit and kiss and cuddle or whatever they did. But when they got up, if they went past the projector, because it was a little square hole, and if you went past it, you could see it on the film. And everyone used to boo downstairs because they could see what was going on upstairs. I did go up in the balcony once or twice when I was a teenager, I think. But we didn't get up to any noughties.
My father, Ronald Maidment, was projectionist there for 10 years. There used to be a shed at the back where the film was kept. If the film broke, there was a fine glue to stick the film together again.
If the projector broke down, which it did quite a lot because it was very old, the film would bubble up because of the heat. And everybody thought that was hilarious. Used to get a round of applause, usually.
Yes, I think my father wasn't pleased, though, when my two brothers he strictly told them not to go and see this particular film. I think it was The House of Wax. And he actually saw the two boys sitting in the cinema watching the film. And he waited outside for them and tried behind a hedge, and he knew they were coming out, and he tried to grab them, and he managed to grab one of the boys' legs, but they ran off. But they really got into trouble when they got home.
Television was not really a factor until the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II in 1953. And suddenly, the popularity of TV sets boomed.
The pavilion was quite badly affected by television, and sadly at the same time the government decided to bring in this entertainment tax, which was very controversial because it basically meant anyone that was providing entertainment, so cinema, theatre, live music and things, had to pay a tax on the tickets. And they were both kind of impacting a pavilion at the same time and really starting to bite, if you like. So over the years, especially throughout the 60s, the building became more and more seasonal. Towards the end, sort of late 60s, early 70s, it was really just used throughout the summer months with Scamps pantomimes in the winter.
Scamps stood for the Selsey Comedy and Musical Performance Society. And they put on an annual pantomime. Initially it was started by Dan Denton, and they used to play to packed houses.
It was still Amdram, but some of the cast were people that throughout the 30s and 40s had been entertainers and been, worked in show business.
The Scamps pantomimes were usually at Christmas, and everyone used to go. I went to every single one of them.
I used to go out just as a dresser with a balloon on a stick and walk about, so I got a lot of applause for that.
Well, I got involved with the Scamps in early 1965 when I was 14, and my mother was helping in the wardrobe department, just ironing, and they needed an extra stagehand. She didn't just suggest me, she put me forward, and I became one of the stagehands.
Sir Patrick Moore, he was involved with the pantomime. I remember I wasn't in it one day. I remember sitting in the audience and he came on and he was dressed up. He'd loved having fun, We had great fun.
I do remember Aladdin.
The stage manager, who had worked in the West End and knew where to get black powder from, introduced me to his version of a smoke box. As I say, it was quite dangerous.
We were obviously very frightened when the genie came out the lamp with a big bang.
The genie appeared behind what was a box which was made to look like a rock, and inside it there were 2 3 or 4 inch nails soldered to a cable which went into the 15 amp socket on the wall, and I put a bit of fuse wire between the two and black powder, as it was known. It's known in the business. So you put it on there, and as you pulled the lever, it would spark, the lights would come up, and there was the genie standing in a cloud of smoke. And you could see that the audience definitely reacted to it, which was, I suppose, the point, of course.
I thought it was absolutely wonderful, and I've always liked Aladdin ever since.
And of course, in those days, there was no such thing as health and safety. But we did have a visit from a fireman, which I guess was pretty standard for shows. Because I guess the stage manager hadn't actually got official permission to have this black powder, he gave me the container of it and asked me to hide it in one of the fire buckets, which was full of sand. And this is, I thought, very clever. He said, don't forget to put the fag butts back on the top so that the fireman doesn't notice anything, which worked. It is quite a coincidence, actually, because I was only 14, and I had no idea at that time that I was going to spend my entire career in theatre and entertainment, which I did. So, yeah, it was quite an explosive start, I suppose.
The pavilion finished in 74, and it then became used as a packing warehouse for W.K. Thomas, who made and put together packs of cutlery and cardboard plates and so on for airlines.
The people that were in the building from 1974 didn't really use the space for much other than packing. After that, they went into administration, and the guy that bought the building in 2008 wasn't really sure what to do with it.
John Faulkner said to me, I'm part of an organisation called Theatres Trust, and Theatres Trust is the government advisory body to theatres at risk. He he said, I would like to ask you if you would go to the pavilion, have a look round and make a report on it, which I can then send to the Theatres Trust, which they can then decide if there should be any government money put into the building to try and restore it.
You could barely get into the building. We had to stumble over so much junk, and Pamela said, my goodness, it just looks like the trenches. And that was the spark, really.
Pamela and Gillian came along and kind of strong-armed him into allowing them to put on performances in the space. The first one was The End of the Journey, which was a World War I centenary piece about R.C. Sheriff and him writing Journey's End, or part of, in Selsey.
Welcome to the Pavilion Theatre. My name is Sheriff, R.C. Sheriff.
As I sat, as I've said, looking on the beach where Sheriff sat, looking over the sea and thinking of the letters that he wrote home from the First World War, I thought that the play would take the form of letters home.
He's written me a poem. Sad one, is it? No, it's got a bird in it.
They literally converted what was being used as a builder's yard into the Somme. It was just unbelievable. The original balcony had sandbags plastered all over it. They had people from Chichester Theatre and other organisations doing sound and lighting, and it was absolutely incredible.
Of course, there weren't any seats. You know, there was nothing like seats. So people had to walk through and then they had to stand.
And we began, and it was exciting because we knew that it could be a theatre. It was a theatre, it is a theatre. So every year after that, we try to put some performances theatre into the pavilion.
What they did with this is they sort of managed to really light a fire and under the community and say, look, we could do something with this building. And they were completely instrumental in bringing it all together and giving us that mission, if you like, to go forward and actually try and do something.
There's a wonderful proverb in Spain, and it says, from little acorns, oak trees grow. I love that, because you plant a seed and then something grows.
In 2017, a few people got together to try to save the pavilion. And the Pavilion Trust was eventually formed with that in mind.
The regeneration project that's going on now at the pavilion is a culmination of several years of work, raising funds to buy the building, purchasing the building, and now working to try and return it to community use. It really was in a bit of a state. I mean, the roof was leaking in lots of points. We had to entirely replace the roof. The small hall at the back had brambles that were 3-4 inches thick growing through the walls. And it's been a mammoth project, even to get to this point where we're sitting on a level floor in the balcony now.
Oh, I think I shall feel so proud when the pavilion once again opens its doors.
I hope I will be the first one to come through the door.
Yeah, it's quite an important building, I think, and I hope it will become so again, of course.
It was a great thrill to me to know that the old pavilion and the cinema days could come back, and I'm very, very pleased that they're doing this wonderful renovation for the whole community.
We're doing this so in another 100 years' time, another group of crazy people can take it on and do it again.
To bring new life to an old building is a privilege.
There's a lot of work to be done, we know, but it's a really pleasing thought for me.